Voice America. Live. This is Point of View. And now, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
Well, thank you for joining us today on Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and I think you're going to find this program very, very interesting and informative. There has been a lot of discussion lately about whether the United States is a Christian nation. Whatever you think about that question, the early history of the United States was heavily influenced by Christianity, but not just Christianity, also by Jews and the Hebrew Bible, which we call the Old Testament. Joining me in this hour to discuss his new book, The Jewish Roots of American Liberty, is Professor Wilford M. McClay. He is a professor of history at Hillsdale College, where he holds the Victor Davis Hanson Chair of Classical History and Western Civilization. Dr. McClay, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's hard for me to think of a more timely book than your book at the time it's coming out now, given some of the discussion we have about Christian nationalism, excuse me, and the anti-Semitism that was really prevalent, not so much lately, but in the past few years. You start out the book in the preface by saying the closeness and foundational character of the relationship between the American experience and the Jewish experience and the nature of the Hebraic impact of the United States. So that's what you're looking at. Your book includes a number of essays by people. You are the editor of it. Give us kind of an overview of the book.
Well, let me talk a little bit about the origin of the book, because it was the timing that you're speaking of is providential, or at least fortuitous, because it wasn't anything we planned. When I say we, I have a co-editor, Stuart Halpern, who's a rabbi and who's also on the administrative staff of Yeshiva University in New York. Mm-hmm. And the way this started was that Stu and others invited me to come up to Yeshiva to talk to Jewish teachers in Jewish day schools about why they needed to study American history, why American history needed to be a subject in their schools. It may sound like an easy lift, but it was actually something that I think needed to be said, and it was very well received. I came back a couple of times, and we ended up having a big conference built around this theme, more or less the theme of what became the book, and we it was very successful again, and Stu and I sort of thought, there's a book in this, and so we took some of the better, more coherent, or at least applicable presentations from our conferences and added a few other things, and came up with the book that you see before you that deals with tries to indicate the close relationship between Jewish ideals and American ideals and the ways in which that has worked out in practice. So it kind of grew from being an argument why Jews need to know about America and why they need to appreciate America as a home like none other has been for them during their many millennia of tribulation and dispersion around the globe. But also why America should value the Jews. It's a sort of a both sides kind of thing. And so it has that kind of feeling that there's an affinity there that we haven't really appreciated because we have, to some extent been caught up in the sort of social and theological disputes between Christians and Jews, which have been going on for a long time. And, I think back often in this project, I would think back to the early history of the church and the heresy of Marcionism, which you probably know about, but your listeners may not, that is the notion that the Old what we call the Old Testament and the New Testament should be kept absolutely distinct from one another. The Old Testament is in some versions of that understanding a different God. It's the wrong God. The Yahwehistic God of the Old Testament is not the true God, and so this was firmly rebuked. This heresy of Marcionism, and ever since the 2nd century, it's been a clear element of Christian doctrine and our understanding of the Bible, the canonical character of the Bible, that both testaments they have to be read together, they have to be taken together, they have to be understood together, with the Greek New Testament building upon the Hebrew New Testament. So anyway, in a way, this whole enterprise has been yet the latest installation of that particular conflict or that particular tension in the Christian past. So the way it all worked out, I really felt it was sort of beyond anybody's control. But and of course, we had this all pretty much worked out what it was going to be by October 7th, 2023, when things changed, rather decisively with regard to the situation of Israel and the Jews in the world. So, but that's another reason this is the timing has been good, is because we do see this new manifestation of anti-Semitism all over the Western world, and we saw it particularly on the college campuses immediately, October 8th. I mean, it was manifesting itself after the brutal attack on Israel coming from Gaza, and that it became an occasion for beat down on the Jews, and you hear things all the time about, well, there's anti-Semitism, and you don't always take it to heart. This certainly did indicate something had been brewing for a long time. This didn't just suddenly happen, and so we have a lot of work to do, I think, in reacquainting, and particularly concerned myself about my Christian brothers and sisters, that they understand, when Pope John Paul II, who I'm not a Catholic, by the way, but he referred to the Jews as our elder brothers in the faith. That always has resonance for me, that there is something about the relationship of Christian Jews that ought to be better, more fraternal than it is. So I guess for me, and I think for Stu Halpern as well, this is a contribution to that dialogue, that sense of fraternity.
Good.
Across that line.
My guest for this hour is Wilfred M. McClay. He is a professor of history at Hillsdale College. We're talking about his new book, The Jewish Roots of American Liberty. I'm holding it up for our viewers online to see. It's edited by him and by Stuart Halpern. When we come back, we'll get into some of the specifics about how Jews influenced American history. So stay with us. We'll be back on Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
On the last day of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, a woman asked Benjamin Franklin what government he had given them. His famous reply was, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." Professor Robert George wrote about how to keep our republic. He begins by reminding us that most Americans are concerned about the direction of this country. He says a December 2025 Gallup poll showed that just 24% of Americans were satisfied with the nation's direction. A Politico poll from a month prior found that 49% of Americans thought the country's best times lie in the past, while only 41% thought that America's best times are yet to come. He observes that our civic and political structures remain fundamentally intact, even if they have been pushed to their limits in recent years and decades. The government is still functional. What we're missing is virtue. The political culture rests upon a moral culture of the people. Virtues must exist, and virtues must be nurtured by each generation. The basic institutions of civil society, family, religious community, private organizations, are what promote civic virtue and are indispensable in transmitting essential virtues. Unfortunately, he concludes, it is difficult to conceive of a moment in our nation's history when institutions devoted to our cultivation of virtue have been weaker. Edmund Burke referred to these institutions as little platoons. They are the essential building blocks of virtue. They work together to educate and encourage virtue in the citizens. The solution to our political divisions can't be found in politics. It can be solved by encouraging the growth of these little platoons. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back on Point of View. My guest for this hour, Professor Wilford M. McClay. He is a professor at Hillsdale College, and we're talking about his new book, The Jewish Roots of American Liberty, which he co-authored or co-edited with Stuart Halpern. Professor, you mentioned in there, the book mentions that the early Americans, we had a high view of Hebrew scriptures, and that affected us in many ways. The Protestants did. How did that view of Hebrew scriptures affect Protestantism?
Well, I think especially did Protestants in the Reformed tradition, that is, deriving from Calvinism, and that would certainly fit the Puritans that settled in New England and were so. Their influence on American intellectual and religious history is enormous, outsized for their numbers. But it was overwhelmingly Protestant in the coloration, the religious coloration of all the British North American settlements were that way.
I think you mentioned about 98%, don't you? With 2% Catholic.
No, I think there were 25,000 Catholics at the time of the American Revolution. So this is out of a population of about 2 million or so. So it was tiny percentage, and Protestants were not very well disposed to Catholics at that time and place. But at any rate, the high view of the Old Testament, I think, comes partly from the fact that the Puritans who came over, first of all, to make the obvious point, Protestants, by and large, placed a very high value on Scripture, and that's part of the Reformation, and the Reformed tribe among Protestants even more so, and they saw the Hebrew Bible as consisting of a lot of not just sort of moral and spiritual advice, direction, and so on, but real direction for the construction and maintenance of communities. After all, the Jews were a people, and there was a way in which the Puritans who came over, whether from Holland or from England, were coming as a people, and they were coming as a people to establish a community. And there's more resources for thinking about political organization in the Old Testament than there is in the New. The New is really not concerned with the construction of earthly communities so much as it is with the worship of a Lord whose kingdom is not of this world. So it's natural that they would have been drawn to place more emphasis and to see in the proper construction of what they thought they were doing was, creating the environment for a purified version of the church. What the Church of Jesus Christ from apostolic times had become corrupted by the various accretions of wealth and power and the Roman Catholic Church, especially, but also the Church of England, just as much. they were not always separating from the Church of England, but they were separating themselves physically and creating a new Zion in the wilderness. So they saw that their themselves in a kind of, if I may put it this way, Zionist mode, that they were building a new community that would worship God in spirit and truth in the proper way, such as was no longer possible in England. So I think it's that dimension that's present in the very historical accounts of the people of Israel in the Old Testament that drew them. And, you cannot exaggerate the extent of that effect on them. They really saw what they were doing. I'm talking about the Puritans. They saw it through the template, through the filter of biblical stories. So they saw themselves reenacting the Exodus. And you see this again and again. It's not just a metaphor for them. It is really a template or a lens through which they reviewed the reality, the ontological reality of what they were doing in service to a commission from God. So naturally, they were going to read again into the story of the Exodus, which is sort of central to them, as it is central to Jewish identity. The passage from slavery in Egypt, in England, in religiously unfree England, corrupted church, to a promised land where they can start anew, and that's one of the parallels that they see of their experience with the experience of the Jews that runs through so much of that Puritan sermonizing, and then it becomes part of our national way of looking at things. And an interesting story. It's not was glancingly mentioned in the book, but I wish, looking back on it, we made more of it. When after the American Revolution in 1776, after the beginning of the American Revolution, a committee was convened with Jefferson and Franklin and Adams to decide what the Great Seal of the United States should look like. They had to do all these things, and Franklin came up with the most amazing suggestion. He thought it should depict the Exodus, and quite literally show an image of Moses standing on the eastern side of the Red Sea with his hand held out over the water, while on the west side the Pharaoh, who looks suspiciously similar to an 18th century monarch, Pharaoh and his troops are being swamped by the waters closing back in on them, and so it is. And there's a slogan: obedience. Excuse me. It's rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. We have this on the cover of the book that you're holding, and you can see on the around the edges the motto. Well, actually, it isn't shown on the cover. I'm sorry about that. I'm looking at it now, but the motto is there. Resistance to tyrants, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God.
Were Jews active in the Revolution?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sure. There weren't that many of them. There were fewer Jews than Catholics, but there's a fellow named Haim Solomon who was the chief financier of the revolution, and in fact, he pretty much sacrificed his whole fortune to the revolutionary cause. He's an interesting guy. He was a Polish birth, a Sephardic Jew, but emigrated and became a very, very involved, very deeply involved with the Patriot cause. He joined up with the Sons of Liberty, which was a very activist group, but he's a kind of exceptional case. There's a statue to him on one of the main avenues. I think it's Wacker in Chicago, celebrating his role in the revolution. But there were others. There were people who now exclusively I know of fighting on the side of the patriots. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if there were some, but I don't know the stories of any who fought on the loyalist side, on the British side. But, So I think pretty much they saw the cause of the patriots as something that they could endorse. It was good for them, and some of this may have to do with one of the great contributions of Jews to early America was the concept of religious liberty,
yes.
Which of course was self-interested because it would include them, but they were very active in promoting it. Very gratified when George Washington.
Professor, hold that thought when we come back on the break. I'll let you finish that about what George Washington did in sending out letters. And we're talking about Jewish roots of American liberty. My guest, Professor Wilfred M. McClay. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Have you ever met a child you knew would do great things? They displayed remarkable imagination, understanding, and a zest for learning. Now imagine someone takes that child and instead of fostering their potential with a real education, they feed them nothing but lies. You know, that scenario isn't so far from reality. From a young age, Americans are fed a consistent stream of distorted facts, from the secular indoctrination they receive in many public schools, to the biases presented as fact in many colleges and universities, to the barrage of misinformation from the mainstream media and the lack of moral grounding in our society. It's not that Americans aren't capable of understanding the truth, it's that they aren't exposed to it enough. You can expose more Americans to the truth when you give to Point of View, where listeners receive facts, perspective, and biblical truth they don't get from society. As long as we have truth, we have hope. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And we're back on Point of View. We're talking with Professor Wilfred M. McClay. He is a professor of history at Hillsdale College, and we're talking about, he's the co-author, co-editor of a new book, Jewish Roots of American Liberty, and the subtitle is The Impact of the Hebraic Ideas on the American Story. And Professor, when we took time for the break, you were talking about George Washington, and there's several references in the book to George Washington reaching out to various Jewish congregations in America.
Yeah, this was a subject for which he had a heart, and strong feelings, and early on in his administration, and he remembered Washington. One of the many admirable things about him was that he had a very strong sense of precedence. That the things he did would set a precedent. As president, would be a precedent, and. So he tried to do things with that kind of set precedential import in mind. And one of the things he did was correspond with a number of different Jewish congregations, Hebrew congregations, in the country at the time. And one of them is famous, and I'm going to read you a little bit from it. But we've concluded a bunch of them in the book. To give a sense that this was not just a one-off. Mm-hmm. The letter he wrote to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island, which was one of the serious, Newport, Savannah, these were important areas of Jewish settlement, Philadelphia. And here's this portion of the letter to the Hebrew congregation in Newport is so powerful. He says, this is written in 1790, so just after his ascent into the presidency. The citizens of the United States of America have a right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy, a policy worthy of imitation. All possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. And here's the really great sentence. Is now no more than toleration spoken of, as if it was by the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it, on all occasions, their effectual support. That's pretty strong stuff. I mean, that's to bigotry, no sanction, persecution, no assistance. That's going to be the nature of America going forward, according to George Washington. We haven't been perfect, but it has certainly been part of what we're about. Is that notion that being made in the image of God, which is the basis for the declarations of independence and its assertion that all men are created equal. That's the only thing it can possibly mean, is that in some sense, in a God's eye view, we are equal, and that equality is in our being and bearing the Imago Dei, the image of God. But this feature of our faith is going to be carried over into the way we regard religion, and that no man should be coerced into believing what the religious establishment of the time thinks. That was something else that we know. The First Amendment would say there's no established church, no establishment of religion. That doesn't mean that religion had nothing to do with the country. There's a distinction to be made there between being devoted to a establishment church for which fees, tax revenues would be collected and distributed to cover the building expenses of churches and the salaries of ministers and so on. There's a distinction between that and asserting that religion has a very powerful place in public life.
While we're talking about presidents, there is a chapter in there by Tevi Troy, presidential historian, and we've had Tevi on a few times in the past. I thought it was a great chapter, as he looks at just sort of the presidents and the Bible. I think is the name of his chapter, but he highlights several things in there. Who is the president perhaps with the most familiarity with the Bible? Oh,
I don't know. That would be hard to say. I mean, certainly Jimmy Carter would be up there, even though I personally think his policies in the Middle East were not good. But I want to give him credit for being knowledgeable about the Bible. But I would vote for Harry Truman in this connection, in the Jewish connection, because Harry Truman, of course, he was president when the whole issue of whether the creation of the modern state of Israel after the Second World War, after the Holocaust, and came up, and he raced to identify the United States with that cause, and in fact had a lot to do behind the scenes with this coming to pass. It's a great story, which forgive me for just a second to tell you. In 1953, after he had left office from the presidency, he came to New York to the Jewish Theological Seminary, and with a good friend of his, going back to his days in the Army, named Eddie Jacobson, who was Jewish, and Eddie introduced him to the theologian and said, "This is the man who helped create the state of Israel." Well, when Truman said, "What do you mean? What do you mean created the state of Israel? I am Cyrus. I am Cyrus." Now, maybe not all of your listeners will get the allusion, but he did not have a college education, but he had studied the Bible and taken it extremely seriously. He also knew a lot about ancient history, knew about ancient Rome and the ancient Middle East. But he knew who Cyrus the Great, Cyrus II, the Persian king who overthrew the Babylonian Empire and basically underwrote the return to Jerusalem of the Jewish population that had been held in the Babylonian captivity. That's what he was alluding to. I am Cyrus. I am. It's maybe sounded a little grandiose, but I think what he was showing just by that comment is how much the Bible was his frame of reference for understanding the events in the Middle East, in that part of the world, in the Holy Lands. He opposed, as president, there's a lot of interest in relocating the Jews to Brazil and other places. He did not support those ideas as alternatives to the Holy Land because he had a sense drawn from his reading of the Bible that was the appropriate place for the refounding of Zion. So it's fascinating, this degree of, but he was a Bible believing Baptist. A lot of his foreign policy and domestic policy flowed from his biblical faith.
I was in a Baptist seminary during Jimmy Carter's time in there, and I noticed in the book it mentions, and the seminarians in the Baptist seminary were generally very supportive of him when he became president. They were much less so towards the end of it. And I noticed in the book it says Carter liked to read Paul Tillich, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Karl Barth, Martin Buber, and his favorite was Reinhold Niebuhr. Bonhoeffer's gotten something of a renaissance here lately, but a lot of those are very liberal theologians, and that may have explained some of Carter's problems.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think his views on the Palestinian issue were more dictated by politics than by his reading of the Bible. He was within. I don't want to get into the politics of the Southern Baptist Convention, but he was part of this sort of liberal dissenting group who were maybe liberal is too strong a term. Although I think by the end of his life he really become a theological liberal. But and so his reading of the Bible was likely to be more literary, more metaphorical, less commanding. Even though, of course, he was I just mentioned him favorably because I think he did introduce into American life, the mainstream American life, the concept of evangelicalism.
Hold that thought. We'll be back with our final segment with Professor McClay in just a minute.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We're back on our final segment with Professor McClay and the co-editor of the new book, Jewish Roots of American Liberty. And Professor, we've been talking about politics and history, but we also ought to touch on literature because Jewish ideas sort of helped or swayed U.S. literature as well. And I'm thinking specifically a couple of the books mentioned in the essays there are Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter and Herman Melville's Moby Dick, which starts out, I am Ishmael.
Yeah, it's about that. Absolutely. They're both Bible-soaked works of literature and authors. one of the things I would say is, American culture in the time that Hawthorne was writing and Melville was writing, which was both of those books were published in the 1850s, and that was a time of high optimism in American life, but also of a kind of underlying dread. The high optimism was this sense that human we had sort of transcended the condition of being unable to improve our lot in life, and that anything was possible. You had thinkers like Emerson and Whitman, who sort of extolled the kind of unlimited frame of American possibility. And then you have Hawthorne, who is kind of reining all of that in, all of that enthusiasm, all that optimism, all that perfectionism, all that reformism down, and saying, there's a great story of Hawthorne called Earth's Holocaust, in which reformers burned down everything from the past and discovered that the one thing that would matter they have not touched in that is the human heart. It is the perversity of the human heart, our fallenness, our fallen nature, that is the obstacle to perfecting ourselves. And something like this with, the Ahab's quest in Moby Dick, his maniacal quest for the great white whale, which ends up destroying himself, destroying his crew, everybody except Ishmael. And what does it mean that Ishmael, the sort of the offspring of Hagar, who represented, in some sense, Abraham's impatience with God, that God had not given him a son, and so he resorted to extramarital means, and of course Ishmael has a part in the inheritance, but not his standing is not the same. It is the son, as Isaac, the son of Sarah. Anyway, yes, these are all, they're ways in which the Hebraic, if I may use that term, the Hebraic vision of things says there is a limit, there is a ceiling on human aspiration, and I, the Lord, have dictated that ceiling shall not be surpassed, and you cannot mock God and expect not to pay for it. So that there is this overweening ambition of Ahab in Moby Dick, and Hawthorne's work is full of not so much the Scarlet Letter, but of these mad scientists who want to perfect nature and always end up destroying the things that they purport to save. These were very pessimistic but also realistic voices coming into the and making for better literature, by the way, than kind of pie-eyed optimism does. More realistic, more in tune with the reality of human frailty and the mixture of good and bad motives that drive all of us. So yeah, I think that Hebraic element is very important to American literature. Something else that I think is important to us now to recover is that there is, there's some way in which this is one of the ways that Christianity, I think, needs to have a kind of grounding in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, is that we've lost a sense of the fact that God has ordained for us that we're not to, that happiness and flourishing, full flourishing, what we're made to be, does not happen from us being free in the sense of having no constraint on us. That God has told us that things like food, sex, many of the more fundamental elements of life are things that we need to be instructed in the proper use of them and that instruction takes place through revelation. It may be often in accordance with nature. It may not be, but that structure of law that is the great legacy, maybe the greatest legacy of the Hebraic tradition, is not to be done without. Even when we're told that by Paul and others that the law is not something that is ultimately binding on us. Well, we have to have the law before we can move beyond it. That foundation has to be there. And if it's simply viewed as irrelevant, then the Christian liberation takes on a very, very, very different coloration. And then, any kind of identity transformation, such as we're seeing of great abundance in our own time, becomes legitimate. But that's not the way it should be. If you think of both testaments working in tandem with one another. Now, I'm preaching at you. I'm sorry for that, but I do think that there's many ways that Christianity, the practice of Christianity, irrespective of what church you're talking about, what denomination, could really benefit from reconnecting with some of the solidity of the Hebraic tradition as reflected in the Old Testament.
Professor, we're about out of time. Have you got a project you're working on now that you can give us a hint about?
Yeah, it's a little bit related. I've got two projects. There's actually one I'm working on more immediately, having to do with the humanities and why we need them. But and that'll be just a short book. But beyond that, I have a project I've been at for a while, which has to do with guilt. I'm fascinated by in the Western world by the ubiquity of guilt. That guilt people, and I see it in my students. I see it; they feel guilty for the blessings of their life. Because they're not universally shared, because they may come out of a complicated history, you name it. And I'm fascinated with the ubiquity of it, and that Nietzsche predicted that once we got rid of God, then guilt would disappear. And boy, was he ever wrong.
He was wrong.
I'm fascinated by that, trying to figure out why that's so.
Professor, thank you so much for joining us. We've been discussing with Professor McClay his new book, Jewish Roots of American Liberty. We'll be back on Point of View.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. Across America, live.
This is Point of View.
And now, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and we're going to continue our discussion about politics and the role of history in the United States with Jack Danforth, former Senator John Danforth. You know, the country has been, both Republicans and Democrats are being pulled in different directions as they're searching for a path forward and something to define the party. Senator John Danforth has served as a United States Senator in the U.S., U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, and Attorney General for the state of Missouri. He is an ordained Episcopal priest, and in 2024, he founded the group Our Republican Legacy with Senators William Cohen and the late Alan Simpson and 34 other distinguished members of Congress. Senator Danforth, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Merrill. Good to be with you.
Well, you know, you stepped out of the Senate, I think, about 1995 or 6. What have you been doing in the time since?
Well, I am a lawyer. I'm still more or less practicing law, though not the serious brand that I used to practice. I've remained very interested in politics. Mm-hmm. I've not run for elective office since whatever, the last century, I guess. But I'm obviously, I think all of us have a lot of opinions about politics and the current state of the country and what is going so obviously off the rails. So that's been a big interest of mine.
So you started Our Republican Legacy in 2024. What moved you to do that?
Well, the political center in America is one. It just doesn't exist as far as elective politics is concerned. But that's where most of the American people are. I mean, most American people are not on the fringes. They're not extremists. They're just somewhere in the broad center of American politics. But they're not given that choice now by the two parties. Each of the two parties has gravitated toward its poles. The Democrats have become quite far to the left, very different from the Democratic Party that was around when I was in the U.S. Senate, or at least most of the Democratic Party. And the Republican Party has become something very different from what it was, and not just different, really the opposite, I would say, from what it used to be. It's become a far-right party. It is no longer a conservative party. There's a big difference between the MAGA version of the Republican Party and conservatism. The MAGA version is not conservative for reasons that we can discuss. But so that right now the American people go to the polls on Election Day, and they're given two choices. And a lot of people would rather vote for none of the above. We don't like these two choices. They both seem just too far out for us. So our Republican legacy is a movement. And the movement is to try to restore the Republican Party as a responsible conservative party, which it is not today, to try to restore it as a responsible conservative party, and in doing that, to do our part in restoring the political center of America.
Now, if people go to Our Republican Legacy's website, you have listed on there 5 principles that you're trying to sort of reaffirm, reestablish, remember. What are those principles?
Well, not in any particular order, but one is fiscal conservatism. The Republican Party has traditionally been a conservative, fiscally conservative. That means we were concerned about huge deficits, the growing national debt. We wanted to put the brakes on the national debt rather than have it explode. And that's just out the window. with today's MAGA version of the party. I mean, the national debt is now $38 trillion. That should be unthinkable. And with the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, it's going up in the next decade, another $3-4 trillion, something like that.
Yes, the congressional
idea is, I'm sorry?
I was going to say the Congressional Budget Office estimates that the deficit will be around $2 trillion for the next 10 years, each year, the annual deficit.
Wow, okay. So that's more than I had thought, but it's unthinkable. I mean, no Republican back in the day when our party was quite different from what it's become, no Republican would have agreed with that. Mm-hmm. All of us would have tried to restrain the growth of the debt and restrain these huge deficits. So that's one point of difference. Another is we conservatives believe in the private sector, not in big government, not in government management of the country. And that also has gone, by the boards, not just by the huge tariffs that have been imposed. That would have been unthinkable. Ronald Reagan would be rolling over in his grave if he thought that a Republican administration would favor huge tariffs and unpredictable on-again, off-again tariffs. Mm-hmm. That's the opposite of what Ronald Reagan would have supported. And then there's the government management of, say, what is taught on college campuses. Now, you may very well disagree with college campuses, but you may disagree with what you would call wokeism or whatever on college campuses. But we reach the point where the federal government should be the monitor and the controller of admissions policies in colleges and universities, or that the federal government should be involved in what clients' law firms should represent, or that the federal government should decide the president of the United States, not the federal government, the president himself, should be able to decide what money is spent and what taxes are imposed, tariffs. So all of this is a reversal of conservatism. It is not conservatism. And then there's, I think every Republican back in the day would have strongly supported helping Ukraine in its war against Russia. Mm-hmm. Whereas now President Trump, for some reason that is, I think, strange, is cottoning up to Putin. So that's another point of difference.
Senator Danforth, hold it there. We need to take a break here. My guest for the next segment will be Senator John Danforth, former senator from Missouri, and we're talking about a group he started 2 years ago, Our Republican Legacy. You can find out more information about that at pointofview.net. We will be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
On the last day of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, a woman asked Benjamin Franklin what government he had given them. His famous reply was, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." Professor Robert George wrote about how to keep our republic. He begins by reminding us that most Americans are concerned about the direction of this country. He says a December 2025 Gallup poll showed that just 24% of Americans were satisfied with the nation's direction. A Politico poll from a month prior found that 49% of Americans thought the country's best times lie in the past, while only 41% thought that America's best times are yet to come. He observes that our civic and political structures remain fundamentally intact, even if they have been pushed to their limits in recent years and decades. The government is still functional. What we're missing is virtue. The political culture rests upon a moral culture of the people. Virtues must exist, and virtues must be nurtured by each generation. The basic institutions of civil society, family, religious community, private organizations, are what promote civic virtue and are indispensable in transmitting essential virtues. Unfortunately, he concludes, it is difficult to conceive of a moment in our nation's history when institutions devoted to our cultivation of virtue have been weaker. Edmund Burke referred to these institutions as little platoons. They are the essential building blocks of virtue. They work together to educate and encourage virtue in the citizens. The solution to our political divisions can't be found in politics. It can be solved by encouraging the growth of these little platoons. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'm Merrill Matthews, sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and we're back with our discussion with former Senator John Danforth. He was the Attorney General of Missouri from 1969 to 1976 and a U.S. Senator from 1976 to 1995. He's also been the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and a ordained Episcopal priest. And we're talking about his organization, Our Republican Legacy. And so, Senator, you were talking a bit about some of the principles that you're trying to reestablish in the Republican Party.
Yes, and I'd say that of all of them, and they're all significant, but to me the most significant is respect for the constitutional order. I mean, our Constitution really is a magnificent document. We are blessed to have it as outlining the structure of our government. And it provided for 3 branches of government. And Article 1 of the Constitution, that is really the leading part of the federal government, was to be Congress. Congress was supposed to make law. Congress was supposed to set governmental policy. Nowadays, particularly with just a compliant Republican Party in Congress, Congress has become weak and almost insignificant. So the policy is all concentrated in one person, the president. The president, by a stroke of a pen, can raise tariffs. By a stroke of a pen, can reduce tariffs. By a stroke of a pen, can withhold spending. And by his own decision, can decide whether or not to bomb another country. All of this is the concentration of power in one individual, which is the opposite of what the constitutional structure established, and it was exactly what the framers of the Constitution feared. They feared creating too much power in one person.
Senator,
they feared that even George Washington would be a king.
Yes.
And now we've we've reached the state where governmental power is really concentrated in the whim of the single person.
Senator, this has been a problem, it seems to me, for a while, because there was times when Barack Obama was president that I thought Harry Reid, the majority leader in the Senate, oftentimes just catered to him and let Barack Obama get away with things that I would say a strong Congress, House, and Senate would not have done. Back under Senator Robert Byrd, when he was majority leader of the Senate, a Democrat, they coveted their constitutional authority to be able to try to limit the president, and we just don't see that either. We didn't see it from Democrats on Joe Biden's time, and increasingly from Republicans in President Trump's time.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think every problem has its roots in each of the 2 political parties. But I'm a Republican. That's all I've ever been. I've never been an independent or a Democrat. I am a Republican. So my concern is what's happened to the Republican Party, and what are we going to do about it? So that's the reason for this organization, Our Republican Legacy. It is to to provide a place, a home, for people who are traditional Republicans who believe in the organizing principles of the Republican Party and the principles that have been in place ever since the days of Abraham Lincoln.
Have the two parties, they've drifted a good bit from where they originally were. Are you optimistic that Republicans can come back to its traditional roots?
I am optimistic. I'm optimistic for two reasons. One is that the basic structure, that is the constitutional structure, is in place, and it when it's working, it's just brilliant. The second is the American people. I believe in them. I have confidence in them. They are good people. Obviously not every single individual, but the American people are fundamentally good people. Most people are good. And today, the business model of politics of both parties is to appeal to the worst in us, not the best. Lincoln talked about touching the better angels of our nature. Politics isn't doing that now. It's making us feel angry. It's making us feel aggrieved, us against them. They're out to get us. We've got to fight. How many people now when you hear candidates now, they're running, let's say a candidate running for Congress of the United States Senate, what do they say? They say, I'm going to go to Washington and fight. I'm going to be a fighter. One candidate said, I'm going to be like a hand grenade rolled onto the floor of the U.S. Senate. Is this what we really need? I mean, do we really think, wow, there's not enough fighting going on now?
How do you think this plays out for the 2028 presidential election?
I don't know. I can't predict it. What's my hope? My hope that the two parties nominate people who are for our party center right and for the Democrats center left, that they don't give us choices between extremes that we really don't want, and we end up voting for the lesser of two evils. That's not a good situation. And I hope that our party, the Republican Party, is a nominee who believes in America, who believes in the constitutional order, who doesn't want to weaponize the Justice Department and the FBI against political opponents, who wants to try to hold the country together, who believes in basic Republican principles of fiscal responsibility and the primacy of the private sector in determining what our future is.
There's other groups that have formed out there. Principles First is one that they've established some principles. Freedom Conservatives is another group that are somewhat similar to the Principles First. I think they're having their own meeting. I think you're having Our Republican Legacy is having a meeting in a couple of weeks in Washington, sort of close to the Principles First. What do you hope to accomplish by some of these meetings?
Well, I think it's a rallying point, and it's an assurance that, each of us, a lot of us individually think, oh my gosh, every time we pick up the newspaper or turn on the television, this is just awful. What can we do about it? And this is something we can do about it. And you're right. Our National Committee meeting, which is everybody's invited to participate. They can participate in person, which is in Maryland, or they can participate online. And they can go to our website, ourrepublicanlegacy.com, to register to be a part of our National Committee meeting. That's February 20th this year between 2 and 4 p.m. And if you want to be there in person, it's the Residence Inn in Oxon Hill, Maryland. But you can participate also online.
Good. So there's those options, and that's close to the Principles First meeting, I believe.
I think so, yeah. And the good news is that, we're not alone. There are other groups that are just as concerned as we are about what's gone wrong. I mean, something is obviously very wrong in American politics. And if it were just confined to politics, okay, that's bad enough. But it's affecting who we are, I mean, families and friendships broken over in politics, broken up over politics. We can't let politics do that to us. So it's really important to just get back to base,
Yes.
Just get our heads on straight.
I agree. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. We've been joined by former Senator John Danforth, who was a senator from Missouri from 1976 to 1995. He is talking about our Republican legacy. You can find out more about Senator Danforth at our website, pointofview.net. I think we also have a link to our Republican legacy there. If you want to find out more about the conferences that are coming up, you can go on there and click on that. Thank you, Senator, for joining us.
Thank you, Merrill.
When we come back, we're going to turn to John Early. I've had him on in the past to discuss welfare and the real fraud in the welfare system. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Who can you trust? Years ago, many of us could probably have provided a fairly long list, but today it seems we almost can't trust anyone. Educators don't even know what a woman is anymore. Many so-called public servants have shown all they care about is themselves. The FBI has been accused of bias, law-breaking, betrayal, and journalism. It's largely corrupt, with no Clark Kent standing up for truth, justice, and the American way. All of this is why Point of View Radio is more important than ever, and your part in supporting us is more needed than ever. Do your part today in supporting trustworthy truth. Stand with us and help push back the lies and the darkness. Visit pointofview.net. Don't put it off. Take a moment right now and click on that big blue button that says Donate Now. Or call to invest at 1-800-347-5151, pointofview.net, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome back to Point of View. You have probably seen discussions in the news about welfare fraud in Minnesota. In our remaining two segments, we're going to talk about welfare fraud, but from a little bit of a different perspective. Our guest for these remaining two segments is John Early. He is a mathematical economist and adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. He served 2 appointments as Assistant Commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and he is the co-author with former Senator Phil Gramm from Texas of The Myth of American Inequality. And he had a piece in the Wall Street Journal along with former Senator Gramm on welfare fraud. The title of it is The Biggest Fraud in Welfare. John, thank you for joining me.
Glad to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so you have a little bit of a different take on the fraud in welfare. Why don't you explain what you're talking about there?
Yeah, it's a little different use of the word fraud, I know.
Yes.
Fraud implies illegality. This is perfectly legal, but it is nevertheless defrauding the American taxpayer for something that we should not be having to pay for. The payments we're talking about here are $1.4 trillion. That's with the T, $1.4 trillion every year from the federal government alone. There's a similar amount coming from state and local governments. And that goes to people of low income through a variety of more than 100 different programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we do that much money, we actually not only raise people out of poverty, we raise them up to middle class levels. And so you have people who work to achieve a middle class income and people who get handouts to have a middle class income. And the latter are the ones that we pay our tax dollars for and account for a large portion of our annual deficit.
And the money we hand out is significant. I mean, you sort of take the money, and Thomas Sowell and other economists have done something like this in the past. They've said, if you take all the money we're providing, it works out to a significant amount of money. If you just handed them cash, it would be a significant amount of money.
Well, yeah, if for example, you took only the families that are classified as poor by the government, and the money that used to do that classification does not include most of these welfare payments. But anyway, if you took those people and split it up evenly among the households, you might not do that in reality, but just to give you an idea, that would be $70,000 per year per household for doing nothing.
Which moves them into the middle class.
Oh, absolutely.
Now,
and we've done this for several years, and the answer is always about the same. It just the numbers just change slightly year to year.
Give us a sense of what we are covering with welfare. I mean, there's cash to low-income people, there's food stamps, there's housing, there's Medicare, Medicaid, which is health care. Give us an idea of some of the things we're talking about.
Well, of course, you hit it there, but one of the biggest ones that's grown a lot recently is various kinds of refundable tax credits. Now, in the government statistics about poverty or about income inequality, they don't count those as income for some reason. They just count them as negative taxes, and then they don't show up in the numbers. But anyway, there's refundable tax credits for earned income tax credit, for the child tax credit. Those are significant.
John, take a second to explain a refundable tax credit, because I know what it means, but many people may not.
Yeah, a refundable tax credit is a credit, for example, the child tax credit of so many dollars per child. And if a working person has a tax credit, what it means is that, well, in fact, usually it's a deduction from their income, so they pay less taxes on their income if they have a deduction, for example, for their health care costs, for example. But this is a actual tax credit. And if you're not making much income, your tax credit may be bigger than the amount of taxes you would owe. Or if you're making no income, you're earning no money, it would all be more than your taxes that you owed.
So if I owed, let's say I'm owed a $5,000 refundable tax credit, and let's say I owe $1,000 in taxes from income I made, since I only owed $1,000, I would get the refundable tax credit, so it would wipe out my $1,000 I owed and essentially give me $4,000. Is that right?
That is correct. The numbers you picked there give you an idea of the order of magnitude that might be involved. For example, if you had a household of three people, of say a parent and two kids, they would get refundable tax credits, or the refundable portions anyway, of nearly $8,000, and that would be cash in the form of a treasury check coming back. Because they pay no income taxes, and then they get nearly $8,000 in a refundable credit.
And that $8,000 isn't taxable. I mean, it's not considered income by the federal government.
That's correct. It's not. I mean, because it's done on the taxes actually, and it's computed after you've computed the taxes, and then you're given this free money. And it's also in most cases not counted as income when you're qualifying for things like food stamps or public housing or something.
And that can add up to be quite a bit of money for some people, I guess.
Right. Well, as I said, if you were making $11,000, for example, you'd get nearly and had two children, you'd get nearly $8,000 in refundable tax credits.
But besides the refundable tax credits, you have other programs that people are able to take advantage of, and that can add up to a significant amount of money.
Oh, it can. I mean, let's just take that particular that's just an example of one that we've run. But in addition to those, they would get food stamps, which has now been called, by different names, but we all know what food stamps are. They'd get about $9,000 a year in food stamps. They'd get another $9,000 or so in various forms of housing subsidies, and it depends partly on where they live, because states administer many of these, programs. So there's variation. Let's say around $9,000 in housing subsidies. They'd get around $900 in energy subsidies to help pay their utilities. They're actually utility subsidies, because it would include not only the heating and the lights, but it would also include their telephone. And then, of course, you mentioned Medicaid. It's a big one. It's for most people, it's the largest single subsidy that they get. For example, again, this family of three, it's about $16,000 a year in free health care. So it's like the government buys you a $16,000 health insurance policy, and then you can go spend that health insurance policy.
You don't,
and there are others.
You don't mention, you don't discuss it much in your piece, but that really opens up, because people can game this system, can't they?
Well, you mean the Medicaid system, or you mean the system in general?
Medicaid, but just in general. I mean, if you
go ahead.
I say if you hide some assets, or you're taking money for doing some daycare, but you're not actually recording that on taxes, it might help you. You might get more money back from the government because they don't know some of the money that you're receiving.
Oh yeah, I mean there is that's the legitimate. I won't say legitimate. It's legally defined as that is a law. That's a breaking of the law. But yes, I mean people do scam the system by failing to report income of various kinds. But part of the quote government fraud is they don't have to report some of the income when they're qualifying for these benefits. Some of it they do, some of it they don't. Almost none of them have to report these refundable tax credits, which is why I mentioned it first, because that's cash they get, but that is not money that they have to report they get when they are applying, for example, for food stamps. Another thing that happens is those utility subsidies I was talking about, there was an interesting scam by the state governments on that back a few years ago, where the federal regulations allowed them to say if someone qualifies for an energy subsidy, then they automatically qualify for food stamps. And so there was an effort to sort of curtail that by raising the minimum amount of the energy subsidy from something like $30 a month to $60 a month. And what states did was they just raised their energy subsidies just by that $30, so that then all these other people that now continue to get automatically read into food stamps.
My guest for the...
You like that one, okay.
My guest for the rest of this half hour is John Early. He is the author with former Senator Phil Gramm of The Myth of American Inequality. And the two of them wrote a piece here just recently about where the real fraud in welfare is. Stay with us. We'll be back with our discussion with John Early in just a minute.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back for our final segment on Point of View. My guest for this remaining segment, John Early. He is a adjunct scholar with the Cato Institute, and he served 2 appointments as assistant commissioner at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And he's our go-to guy on a lot of these federal numbers here that come out that we see. He and former Senator Phil Gramm wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal recently. We have a link to that on the Point of View website, though it's behind a paywall. The name of that was The biggest fraud in welfare. And John, what's important about all this is we are constantly hearing from progressive liberal politicians that the poor are very poor and that the wealth gap, the income gap is so wide that we have to have more programs for the poor. But according to how you look at this, that wealth gap isn't nearly as large as we're told.
Well, yes, it's not how I look at it, it's what the numbers are. Yeah, you don't need a special set of glasses to see that. Just for example, 2/3 of American families today make income that would have put them in the top 1/5 of all families 50 years ago. Secondly, if you count all income, including some of the things we've been talking about, like those refundable tax credits, which are just a treasury check that's delivered to your post box, okay? If you count all that income, the number of people in the percent of the population in poverty drops from over 10% to about 1% or less. And that's not mine and Phil's numbers. There are 2 or 3 academic papers that have come to that conclusion. The Congressional Budget Office has come to that conclusion. There's another set of academic papers that measures poverty in an entirely different way that comes to the same conclusion. So poverty is overstated by at least a factor of 10, possibly more.
On the flip side of this, when they're looking at higher income people, they're looking at their income before taxes, and that affects what they actually have to spend.
That's right. And the tax effect is small when we're talking about poverty, which we have been principally doing here. But if you look at across all income and you divide the population into fifths, which are called quintiles, if you look at the official numbers as put out by the Census Bureau, they don't count most of the welfare payments we've been talking about, and they don't adjust them for taxes. And according, therefore, to the Census Bureau, for the last number of decades, roughly, or last couple decades anyway, the ratio of the income for the top to the income for the bottom has been about 16 to 1. In other words, the top fifth of the population has income that's 16 times greater than the bottom.
Which sounds like a big number.
But that's before you count all the income. You're not, for the bottom, you're not counting all the income. In fact, you're not counting about 80% for those that are defined as poverty. Okay, so first of all, the first thing you have to do is count all the income, and then you need to take away the taxes, because you can't spend the taxes you pay. And if you do both of those, then the ratio is not 16 to 1, but only 4 to 1.
It makes a big difference. Yes. So what would you do on this? I mean, one of the things that people have talked about, and I think Thomas Sowell and some of the others have said, if you just gave low-income people this money, they would have a lot more money to spend. But we also know that there's a lot of fraud in welfare, especially if the government is handing out money. You have people who are gaming the system, scamming the system. We see some of that going on in Minnesota. What would be the thing? What would you do? I guess first off, you would want to have truth in the money that's actually being distributed, so that people know how much they're actually getting. Is that right?
Well, the people that are getting it know what they're getting, but the taxpayer needs to know what they're getting. Because the taxpayer thinks that they've got 10% of the population in poverty, and therefore they feel, well, we ought to help those guys out. But if it's only 1%, why are we spending so much money on it? So that's the first thing. We need to fix the official numbers. We know how to do that. Not only have Phil and I, but others have also done the same work, including the Congressional Budget Office. Go out, count all the money, and then you get not 10% in poverty, but 1% or less in poverty.
What's keeping them from doing that?
Stubbornness.
It's not law that they. I mean, is it law that says you can't count these things?
That is not in law. It requires a regulatory change, but it's just a little bit of paperwork you got to do. So that's very fixable. You can go out and you get to work and you can get it done. So you got to count all the income, and you got to take away, if you're looking then outside of the poor, if you're looking at the total income and distribution, for that you also need to take away their taxes, so that the difference isn't 16 to 1, it's 4 to 1. So that's the first piece of the fix, is let's measure the right numbers. And the suggestions that Sol has made, and he's one of my heroes, he's a brilliant man, and that makes a lot of sense. The problem is, whenever you say spend, Congress thinks, we're going to add spending. No, the first thing you got to do at the same time is you got to take away all the other spending. And as I said, if we, I guess I kind of alluded to it, the amount of money, this $1.4 trillion we spend, if we only took money and gave it to families so that they were out of poverty, they were $1 over the poverty line for their family size, it wouldn't cost us $1.4 trillion. It would only cost us $0.25 trillion. In other words, it would reduce it by about a factor of 7.
Milton Friedman used to argue that he said you've got welfare programs, and what he argued for was what he called a negative income tax, which was just essentially I guess you'd say a refundable tax credit to people. But he said the real threat is you don't want to have a bunch of welfare programs and a negative income tax. And since we sort of have that with the refundable tax credit and some of the other things, and a bunch of welfare programs.
Yeah, and that was kind of what my prelude was all about. You have to be talking about removing everything else, and I mean everything else, all the rest of the transfer payments that are income conditioned, and then replace it with that. Now, if all you did was then just give them enough to meet their poverty level or be better than their poverty level, you run into an incentive problem, because then if you make one more dollar and you have to give up $1 of your welfare payment, it's no incentive to work. So you have to kind of phase it out, which Friedman did, and that's going back to my good old days. I wrote papers on that back when I was in my 20s. So it's a good idea. It's just that getting it through would be very difficult. But yes, as an ideal fix, that's the way you do it. You eliminate all the programs, then you give people enough money to make up the difference between what they make and the poverty line, and then then phase it out. Say, for every additional $2 you make, you lose $1 of welfare payments or some other number. But you still would be spending less money than you are now, and people would actually then see what's happening, and we can account for it better too. Then it's harder to game it, because you don't have 10 different programs that you can jump from one to another, and then you don't tell them you're getting the other one, and they don't count it as income anyway. And it's a real accounting mess. Now,
John, we're going to have to hold it there. We're just about out of time, but thank you so much for joining us.
Been a pleasure.
Thank you. And we've got a link to that Wall Street Journal op-ed on our website at pointofview.net. I want to thank Megan for doing the engineering and Steve for doing the production. And thank you for joining us. Point of View will be back tomorrow with our weekend edition.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday, in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.